I'm going to read some quotes from Francis Ngannou from an interview he did with the MMA Hour, where he was talking about his reasons for leaving the UFC. He said, quote, "In that contract, I'm not free. I'm not an independent contractor. I have no rights. I hand over all the power to you guys. I've seen in the past how you guys can utilize your power against me, and I don't want that. I know that I did everything right. I don't have any regrets. I wouldn't do anything different if I had to do it again. They didn't want anything to do with boxing. They were like, if and only if, and in good faith. And I'm like, I'm not betting on that. At some time, I feel like I was slapped in the face by money, like, take the money and shut up. And that couldn't happen. It was just a matter of principle. And at that time, I knew this was it. They didn't say on the phone, this is what's going to happen, but I knew. I think I just need some respect, more respect at least. It's very important. I need some freedom. I need to feel like a man, own my freedom, control my destiny. I don't want anybody to decide for me. I think I'm man enough to decide for my own. And so far, I haven't been doing a bad job at all." Unquote. Those are the words of Francis Ngannou. Now, I've gone back and forth with MMA fans, UFC fans over the years with regards to the way the UFC operate, the way they treat fighters versus delivering value for the fans. Because many fans of UFC will defend Dana White and they'll defend the organization because they produce quality entertainment. And I get that from the perspective of being a selfish fan, but personally, maybe it's because I've participated myself, I am more sympathetic with the fighters. And also, because of the fact that I'm an individualist. I'm not a collectivist. I'm someone that believes in the rights of the individual and the individual being empowered so that they can rise up from a financial and power perspective. And the way UFC is set up, it stifles individualism, even down to the extent of having everybody wear the same gear, right? Everything is UFC branded. They stifle individualism. Whereas in boxing, you can be as individual as you want. You see, and this appeals to me more, the fact that it's more individualistic in boxing. And the same goes for the money you can earn. In UFC, there is a certain ceiling because the UFC are taking the vast majority of money, the organization, from the events, and the fighters are only being paid a small percentage. But in boxing, it's often the reverse. And when I say often, I'm talking about at the top level. Certainly not at the lower levels, but at the top level, you've got fighters like Canelo and, these other guys who, when they have a show, they're taking most of the money, not their promoter. Now, of course, the TV company's taking an enormous amount of the money, but the promoter, which would be the equivalent of the UFC, Dana White in MMA, they're not taking the biggest cut, So I like the fact that in boxing, the ceiling is higher for fighters. You can go higher. Now, the counter argument would be that boxing is more top heavy than MMA or at least UFC, right? The money is more evenly distributed in UFC. But UFC, or MMA should I say, is top heavy in the sense that the UFC's got all the money, right? So that's very top heavy. If you're not in the UFC, then you ain't making no money in MMA for the most part. There might be a few exceptions here and there, but for the most, you ain't making no money unless you're in the UFC. And in order to get into the UFC, you're at the whim of Dana White. Do you know what I mean? You're at the whim of whoever else is running that organization. So, in terms of how fair it is for fighters, I think it's much more fair in boxing, because in boxing, you get what you're worth. Yeah, you get what you're worth. Whereas in UFC, if you're one of the top fighters, you're really not getting what you're worth. But then again, the lower level fighters are probably getting more than they're worth. Do you see what I'm saying? And when I say what you're worth, I'm talking about in terms of your ability to draw a crowd and get people to pay to watch you fight. You get what you're worth in boxing. If you're someone who's very good, but you have a boring style, people are not going to want to pay to watch you fight. And therefore, you're not worth much in boxing from a financial perspective, right? It's about entertainment. Sports are, well, televised sports, spectator sports are a form of entertainment. So if you're sufficiently entertaining in professional boxing, you'll get what you're worth. You'll get paid, right? If you're sufficiently entertaining on a consistent basis, you'll be like a Derek Chisora, where you build up a cult following, or even Dave Allen, who's not even as good as Chisora. That guy built up a cult following to the point where, yeah, he didn't earn multi millions, but he earned good money for a fighter of his level, like very good money, because he was aggressive and he showed heart and he built this rapport with the fans and what have you. You get paid what you're worth. This is why I don't have an issue with YouTuber boxing. Those guys are capitalizing on the fan base that they've built from their YouTube channels. Their subscribers, their fans, would like to see them fight other YouTubers. So in terms of what they're getting paid for those YouTuber fights, they're getting paid exactly what they're worth. You see? To me, this is fair. When you start penalizing the top guys so you can pay the guys at the bottom, that's not fair on the top guys, is it? You might think it's fair in terms of, it's not quite parity, but distributing the wealth evenly. But look, people are not born equal in terms of ability. Some people have greater fighting ability, athletic ability, intellect, whatever, than other people innately. That's the reality of the situation. And when you stifle those who are born with a greater ability, I just think that's wrong. You know what I mean? When you clip their wings and say, no, you can't go above this level because it will make the people that are not as gifted as you feel bad. Yeah, that's not for me. So the kind of personality I am, also the fact that I box myself, I like the way they do things in boxing with regards to the way they treat the fight. And look, there's plenty of scumbags and horror stories and, all that kind of thing in boxing, no doubt. But if it doesn't work out with one promoter, you got so many choices in boxing. It's not like it is with the UFC where one promoter's got all the money, and if you go outside of that, or it's been this case for many years, you're not going to make anything. No. In boxing, if it don't work out with Bob Arum, you can go to PBC. If it don't work out with PBC, go to Eddie Hearn. If it don't work out with Eddie Hearn, go to Frank Warren. If it don't work out with Frank Warren, go to Ben Shalom. If it don't work out with Ben Shalom, go to whoever, Pro Bellum. You get the point I'm making. Lots of choice for fighters. Whereas in UFC, or MMA, should I say, there's really no choice. Maybe there are certain organizations on the horizon now that are starting to make moves in the MMA world. And if that is the case, that's definitely good for the fighters, and it will force UFC to stop paying their top fighters better, giving them a bigger cut and giving them contracts whereby they can actually do what Francis Ngannou wasn't allowed to do, make money outside of that promotional house. That's what Ngannou's wanted to do for the longest time. He talked about wanting to have rights, wanting to have independence, and all this kind of thing. In the UFC, I think one of the reasons they didn't want Ngannou going and fighting in boxing is because the UFC care about their brand over everything else. And they don't want a situation where their heavyweight champion, well, I think there's two reasons. For one, they don't want their guy going over there and making all that money in boxing, because then he's going to be more difficult to deal with when he comes back, if he comes back to the UFC. He's going to say, hey, I got paid triple what you guys have been paying me, and I'm not even a boxer. But also, I suspect they don't want an incumbent heavyweight champion going over to boxing and getting absolutely decimated, because it's just a bad look. Because then the whole debate about which is better, UFC or MMA or boxing, which is better, that is going to surface again, and it's going to look better for boxing. Now, full disclosure, personally, I think if you're talking about one-on-one, no-holds-barred situation, an MMA guy is probably going to come off on top in most situations against the boxer. That's my personal opinion, right? But the vast majority of the public might not think that deeply about it. if they see Francis Ngannou getting pieced up by whoever, like Tyson Fury, knocked out, etc., they're going to say, oh, wow, see these boxers. No, in a street fight, Ngannou wouldn't be able to even get close because Fury had hit him with this and that shot and blah. You understand? And I suspect at least that Dana White knows this and he doesn't want that to happen. So he would prefer his champions, the guys who are in or close to their primes, incumbent champions, not go over to boxing, not participate in other sports, because it would, if they were to lose and lose badly, it would make the UFC look bad. It would devalue the brand and devalue the sport. So that's what I suspect. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below about what Francis Ngannou had to say, the way he's been treated, him wanting more respect, more freedom. And at this stage of his career, can you really blame him? Even if you are a big fan of Dana White and the UFC and the way they do things, can you blame Ngannou at this stage of his career, wanting to make as much money as possible, wanting to have that ceiling removed, that cap removed? Can you blame him? What is the guy, 36? And yeah, he'll probably get destroyed if he steps in the ring with a Tyson Fury or whatever. Well, not probably. I'm almost certain he will. But he's trying to feed his family, right? He's trying to maximize his earnings at this stage. Would you really begrudge him that? You know, he comes from a very poor country in Africa. He's got lots of relatives, I'm sure, that he wants to feed. And so he's trying to make as many multi-millions as he can. You really going to begrudge him that? I certainly don't. Let me know what you guys think.